Good afternoon. Welcome to our session. Good afternoon, Josh. Good afternoon, our audience. Thank you so much for being with us today. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Ala Tartir, and I'm advisor to Al-Shabaka, the Palestinian Policy Network. And it is my pleasure to be moderating this panel today and this session today as part of the Palestine Digital Activism Forum for this year version. I hope you're enjoying the session so far. We had so many interesting sessions over the past 2 days and more to come tomorrow. And today I'm really delighted to have Josh Patrick Parike with us, who's the head of trust and safety at Zoom. We will have around 1 hour to go through this conversation together, enjoy it, ask Josh as many questions as we would like in this hour. And I will be happy to receive all your questions in the chat here and also share them with Josh to continue this conversation. Thank you, Josh, for being with us today. I know it's a little bit early for you in the US, so really appreciate that.
Oh, it's my pleasure, and it's an honor to be here, and I'm really looking forward to this discussion.
Wonderful. Over the past couple of years, Josh, new phrases being used a lot, like I'm just listing a couple of them. Let us Zoom it. See you on Zoom. I will send you a Zoom link. You are muted. Nice background. So great to have Zoom, and I don't need to cross checkpoints and border to be with you. I can do it all from my home. Is it okay? Is it safe to use this Zoom link, etc., etc.? These are some of the phrases and sentences we heard a lot over the past couple of years. And I think it's not an exaggeration to say millions of Zoom calls took place since then. This is part of the conversation why we're having also now. And during this conversation, I really would like to ask you a couple of questions as part of this forum and to receive questions from our audience. So maybe a first question just to set the stage with. We all know what Zoom is, but maybe if you can tell us what it is not, what Zoom is not as a starter of this conversation.
So that's a good question. First I should say, it was a tremendous position for us to be in moving into the pandemic, a tremendous amount of responsibility that we had to bring communication to people around the world. And we took it really seriously. And my role specifically was to try to make that as safe as possible for our users. That is a big responsibility. And as you've said, we've now become, sometimes, a verb, a noun, all of those things. But it's interesting because we became so prolific, everybody knew Zoom and Zoom was used so much. Sometimes there was a confusion as to what Zoom is and what Zoom isn't. And why that's important for Zoom is that I think we should level set for our users and for regulators around the world, sort of what we do and what we are and why we're not maybe Meta, for example, or Twitter or even some parts of Microsoft. What we are is, or what we like to describe ourselves is as a platform to develop that delivers limitless human connection. But our model is really based on recurring subscription revenue. We don't have ads. We don't monetize data. Our services don't feature public-facing feeds or user posts or public directories. There's no way to follow one another. There's no way to search for each other. And there really is no persistent content. And, that's super important, that distinction, right? Because some of the concerns that folks, may have about platforms that are not like that, aren't applicable to us. And so that's how we sort of shape our thinking at the base level.
Thank you, Josh. And I like this concept of limitless human interactions. And so if I would like to connect this conversation in particular with human rights, with freedom of expressions, with safety and transparency. So maybe if you can share with us some of the key principles and values that of Zoom as a company, what would these principles and values would be?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think first is we are a platform to bring diverse communities of people together, right? To collaborate with one another. We have a variety of users that are not just in the United States, but all over the world, who can entrust us with their communications, from our role in business to, friends and families. People use us to communicate with friends and families, but also big businesses use us, and hospitals use us, and legislatures use us, and schools and universities use us. And so as a result, these are sort of our principles. We take seriously our duty to safeguard the free and open exchange of thoughts and ideas on our platform. And we care deeply for our users and the virtual and physical communities in which they live, work, and play. And we are committed to providing all of our users with a welcoming, respectful, and safe place to work, learn, and share voices.
So the audience might come and ask us why you're discussing Zoom and human rights. Can you tell us a bit more about the relevance of the human rights domain to Zoom? How they are connected, these two words?
Yeah, I mean, I think that so I think the ability for people around the world to communicate with one another in a way that's as uninhibited as possible while safe is sort of a human right, right? Like, and so I think our job really is to provide our service safely to as many people as possible, regardless of where they find themselves living. And that's obviously critical, right? So, whether you're in Palestine or you're in the United States or you're in India or wherever, like, we want to be able to provide our service. And at the most basic level, from the trust and safety process, it really dovetails into human rights specifically, because we want to develop our policies and our tools and our processes and make sure that it adheres to our commitments of free expression, inclusion, transparency, privacy, and the protection of our user data, which are all core to human rights. We also want to make sure if we enter new markets that we do it carefully and we take into account some very specific things like the safety of Zoomies on the ground, wherever they may be. The user data, right? Like I said, how user data is coursing through. And then obviously we have to consider government considerations, right? Like whether the law, US law, permits us to do business, whether there are, international sanctions regimes. Are there laws in the country that make doing business very risky, right? Maybe the country involved doesn't have the highest sort of reputation for human rights considerations. And I think we just have to navigate all of those different interests as we think about providing our services. And doing so shows a better commitment, I think, to the human rights of our users and customers.
I will come back to to give us some concrete examples, especially related to the governments and related to different interactions with the governments and violations of human rights and so on. But before I ask you maybe a bit personal question related to your job, I just would like to remind the audience that they can share and send their questions as we go along, and I will be collecting them at the end, or if they are relevant to the discussion, I will just raise these questions. But when we started this conversation a couple of weeks ago, Josh, I was curious about your job title. You're the head of trust and safety at Zoom. I mean, you gave us a hint of what would that imply, but if you can tell us a bit more about your job, about your daily job, what do you do, and why does it matter to Zoom, but also why does it matter to the human rights domain?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So I mean, it's interesting because to frame this question a little bit, I have to take you back to 2020. So the way I sort of describe it is that, let's say in late 2019, Zoom was a whole different product. Like I mean, not really, but people used it. But mostly it was used by, large customers, enterprise customers, and those sorts of things. And when you think about trust and safety in that context, right, like you maybe didn't see as many sort of core trust and safety issues amongst that customer base. I think it was around 19 million daily logins to the platform, late 2019. Well, flash forward to when I came in, which was the first week of June of 2020. In April, just to sort of go back a little bit, I think we were approaching around 430 million daily logins, right? I think one day in March, our platform was downloaded over 2 million times, and people started using the platform for all sorts of reasons that we could never have even anticipated. And we're blessed that people did that. And so with that came the need for us to take a very thoughtful and disciplined approach to protecting the safety of our users. And that sort of manifested in a couple different ways. So one, we had people doing bad things on the platform, right? They disrupted meetings, with awful things, which made people feel unsafe. And so we had to take an approach to building better infrastructure, better security and safety features into the platform itself, so our users could help make themselves safe, while we also took some responsibility for that by continuing to innovate. So we had law enforcement requests from around the world, really, where because certain people were victims of pretty heinous disruptions and so on and so forth, the local law enforcement around the world were trying to investigate those cases. So we had to create a disciplined process for what those look like. So I was able to create this trust and safety team at Zoom. We had a small one, right before I started, really just a handful or less of people. But once I started, we had good license and support from all the way up to Eric, our CEO, and our executive staff, like Aparna, who's my boss's boss, and then my boss, Lynn, to sort of be, I don't want to say creative, but sort of creative, right? And how we can take a holistic approach towards the safety of our users. So what we did was we created a pretty far-reaching team, which really includes, obviously myself as the lead of the team, but also some lawyers, some investigators and analysts, some engineers, some product managers, all dedicated towards making Zoom safe and then creating the infrastructure to do it. And what I think I really appreciate by what we've been able to create over the last 3 years is this sort of 360 feedback loop of safety, where, let's say, you're in a meeting and something awful happens, you now can report that. Appropriate secure data will be collected around that, so that way we can investigate and we can take action, but then we can learn from it. Because we've got all parts of the ecosystem all under one roof, right? Where we can think about what happened and how we can prevent that from happening again in the future, at least reduce the chance it's going to happen in the future. And so to have policy and law and engineering and product and analysts and investigators all sort of under one roof in trust and safety under me is less about me, more about a wonderful, awesome team. But it's really helped us, I think, make some strides to protect our users and make Zoom safer.
I will come back to questions of accountability and feedback and lessons learned in a second. But now I would like to take you to some of the points that you started discussing related to the global level. I mean, working at the global level brings obviously lots of opportunities, but comes with responsibilities and comes with risks that you have. And then there have been so many allegations around China and Zoom and the protests movement there at some point, just to name one example. So since you joined this job and over the expansion of the team, but the expansion of Zoom presence and use, what are some of the main issues that you have faced at the global level before we move to Palestine? At the global level, some of the main issues that you used, and in particular, they left internal marks on the governance and operations of Zoom.
Yeah, so I think, It's no secret that we faced allegations related to China, especially in June 2020. We were, and the reason it's no secret actually is one of our core principles, which is transparency, right? So I think, as I said before, back in 2020, our platform just changed dramatically, and our usage changed dramatically. So how we thought about it needed to also change. And so, for looking at sort of Eric, our CEO, is sort of famous for approaching everything, and he's not the only one, from like a root cause analysis perspective, right? So like everything is like, what is the thing that we're facing? What is the root cause of it? And how do we move towards a solution? And so that the reason why that's relevant to your question is that we saw, in 2020, we took some action against some Tiananmen Square protests, and we realized that like we needed to develop a better infrastructure for, number one, dealing with government requests from around the world. Number two, increasing our transparency. Number three, develop processes so we could very clearly balance free expression and safety. And number four, increase our cross-team collaboration. And number five is continue to create a culture of continuous learning and adaptation. And in there is a bunch of other stuff, right? So like, what we did June 2020, the first thing we did was we started setting up what's called our government request guide, right? And the idea behind the government request guide is that we needed to be super clear with any government around the world what the criteria was that they needed to follow to make a government request of us. And they would understand if we said no, there was a reason why we said no, or if we said yes, there was a reason why we said yes. And then built on the back of that was the infrastructure so we could sort of capture those government requests and track them more clearly, which is actually a pretty hard thing to do, but we've done it, right? And why that's important is it led to our first transparency report, which was December 17th of 2020. And if anybody in the audience looks back on that December 2020 report, you'll see that we were incredibly transparent about the events around Tiananmen Square and the action we took. I should also say, while we're also doing that, we're developing relationships with certain organizations, right? Because the other thing, going back to this continuous learning and adaptation point, the other thing we found so important is like an acknowledgement that maybe we don't know everything, and we need to engage with communities, non-governmental organizations, et cetera, who may give us some additional perspective in how we think through things. So we started joining organization. One notable one I would mention would be like the Global Network Initiative, which is, that's one of many, but just very helpful to sort of test and inform our thinking. So for us, like putting together like a definitive process, allowing people to hold us accountable for following that process, both through transparency and through engagement. So, and by that, I mean, like, we're going to report on everything we do. And we do it with government requests. And in 2021, we started doing it with respect to our acceptable use policy. So that way we can be engaged, with third parties, we can be challenged, and we can have good conversations so we can learn and improve. So I think the biggest lessons that we've learned in any issue we face, no matter what controversy it is around the world, is we need to think through it. We need to lean on people that might that might have some perspective that we're missing. We need to be transparent about it, and not just transparent in the actions we've done, but transparent in the processes that we follow. And then we need to be comfortable having hard conversations so we can learn.
Excellent. Well, you're raising many questions here. I do wonder, I don't know if you have the answer though, how many government's requests have you received from the Palestinian government or from Israel? But I don't know if you have, that's more out of curiosity over the years, and what would be the nature of these requests?
I don't have it at the tip of my tongue, but if anybody goes to Zoom's Safety Center, which I think is safety.zoom.us. If you you'll see a banner on top, and on the banner on top, you'll see government requests, and you can link into our government requests, both the guide and the transparency report. And the transparency report is, you can manipulate it, meaning that you can, choose whatever countries that you see in there. You can see what we did. We have a bunch of different criteria for how we responded. And not only that, like, you can download actually a CSV file, so you can take a look at it. But so I don't know offhand if we've had any requests from the Palestinian or Israeli government, but it would be in there. I can promise you that.
But this is greatly helpful. So for the audience with us, the link that Josh referred to is safety.zoom.us. Please check it out. I will definitely check it out after this conversation, and I will accept your invitation to challenge you also in the spirit of transparency. So, and here I want to go back to a couple of the principles that you dealt with when you talked about dealing with the big issues at the global level, and that you referred to 4 ways of dealing with the crisis, let's say, or the critique related to think through the process, lean to the people that you work with, and be comfortable with having these hard conversations. We all know, anyone who's attending this conference now and this chat, we know about what we could call the Layla Khalid incident. And here I'm coming to the context of Palestine. So maybe now, as it's been a while since that incident took place, what are some of the lessons that you have learned at Zoom in the spirit of accountability, in the spirit of transparency, in the spirit of having that uneasy conversation?
Yeah. I mean, that, like, first I should say, like, any decision like that is a really challenging one, right? In the sense that, like, anytime we might do something that disrupts with folks' ability to communicate with one another, we need to be thoughtful about it. So, so I think the thing I would say at the top, right, is that the actions we took with respect to Ms. Khaled were not related to the fact that she is Palestinian, right? Like, we have no sort of desire to suppress any particular voice on the basis of where they're from or their ethnicity or their backgrounds, in a sense. And that problem was interesting in two regards. One is, right, it was a general sort of event, right, involving Ms. Khaled. And second was, it was an academic event. And so what we realized in engaging with universities, is just what we did sort of immediately after the first actions that we took, was that we need to think through very carefully how we approach academic events in particular. So this is my sort of long-winded wind-up to say that after the first Layla Khaled event where we took action, we quickly realized that we need to be, again, very thoughtful and deliberate and careful in how we make decisions and build transparent processes around them. And so we did. So what we immediately did after we took the action is we thought about, well, if we were confronted with this again or something like this again, regardless of whether it's Ms. Khaled or somebody else, what should we do? And when we think about what should we do, should we make sure that everybody understands what's happening behind the curtain? And the answer to that is yes. But before we thought about what should we do, instead of going it alone, we solicited participation of a variety of universities to engage in conversations, roundtable conversations with us about how should we think about academic freedom in the context of the use of Zoom. And this is really important because so many universities were using Zoom just to keep the lights on and still use Zoom. So after we took the action, we put together our policies around how we evaluate circumstances that might resemble Ms. Khaled's event, which are agnostic to whether she's a Palestinian voice, right? And we published those processes. We also published what's now called our acceptable use policy, so people can understand how we evaluate that, and then what we call our tier reviewed process for how we evaluate any reports that we receive. And then importantly, we published two things, which is one, sort of our commitment to freedom of expression, and then two, our commitment to academic freedom. Again, like literally the draft for our academic freedom policy, we passed back and forth to some of the universities that we were engaged with, right? To like have them comment and help us think through it. Because as they told us many times, that, that's their area of expertise. They deal with it all the time. So rather than us trying to do it in a vacuum, we wanted sort of their help and consultation with what we wrote. So we then published all of those things by, I think it was the end of 2020. So that way we could be much, much clearer with how we evaluate reports, because the Khaleed event was based on a report that we received from a third party, some interested third party.
Excellent. I mean, there are many points here, and this is another invitation to the audience to come in and ask their questions, also in particular on this Layla Khaled incident. But generally, Josh, I mean, you mentioned earlier, and it is very clear that Zoom is not a social media platform. But we know very well all the suppression of Palestinian voices, or when it comes to Palestine. I feel in certain media platform, whenever Palestine, Palestinian resistance are mentioned or whatsoever, red alarms and red flags go on, and then the censoring process starts. So what I'm sensing in from what you've described so far, and what I'm getting, is that you don't have such red flags coming in as Palestinians are mentioned. But do you have any particular mechanisms at the internal level, like internally? Do you have any particular mechanisms that you deal with Palestine or the Palestine file or the Palestinian? Does such thing exist?
No, other than now we've sort of developed relationships with, the organization that's sponsoring this event, and others, and again, Global Network Initiative. So at least if we are confronted with something like that, we have some resources that we can lean on, right? To say, hey, we're confronted with this circumstance. We'd love to understand a perspective maybe that we're missing, which is something, again, that we're actually really excited about having gained those perspectives. I think it's interesting when it comes to Zoom, again, like sometimes there's a lot of sort of research and talk and chatter about what I'm about to say, which is, should a platform like Zoom be thought about as quote unquote dumb pipes, or is it something more? I think it's probably something more, depending on how it's used. But in the context of thinking about Zoom and sort of its interaction with social media, where I think that sometimes happens is Zoom can act like the dumb pipes, but social media can be used to sort of amplify, something that's broadcasted over Zoom. So, for example, like if Ms. Khaled was being hosted in a webinar, but then it was live streamed over YouTube, then what happens is the YouTube rules overlay the Zoom, the Zoom actual webinar, right? Because it's the YouTube or Facebook Live or whatever that's being used to actually like broadcast all the different stuff. So there's actually like two different sets of potential rules. And what we like to say, and this is like probably too nerdy for everybody here, but maybe not, is that there are different levels of the stack that certain platforms sit, and we tend to be a little bit lower to middle of that stack, whereas the edge of the stack are sort of the Metas and the YouTubes and the Twitters, et cetera, of the world. So the question is like, where would you want, not you personally, but where would people want the rules to be applied there? And for the most part, what we want is, what we think is appropriate is that since Zoom is lower in the stack, and it's not really a social media, it's not on the edge, that more often than not in this context, it acts a little bit more like a dumb pipe, which doesn't necessarily abrogate us or make it such that we don't have safety responsibilities or legal responsibilities, but it should change the analysis a little bit.
I see already a couple of questions are coming in, but before I take some of these questions, Josh, I'm curious about the accountability mechanisms that you have in place. Accountability mechanisms in particular to ensure the set of principles that you talked about at the beginning of these conversations. If you can give us a sense of these mechanisms and how do they function, that would be really great.
Yeah. So I think, I mean, look, and I probably won't attribute this appropriately, right? Which is this notion that sunlight is the best disinfectant. So I do think that transparency, like us being transparent, is the best mechanism for us to be also held accountable by our users, customers, and the communities in which we operate, right? Because one of our overall core principles for Zoom is this notion of care, which is that we do care not just about, our users, but the communities where they are. So when we are transparent, right, when we do publish what we do and why we do it and how we do it, we also invite others, including folks probably participating in this event, to hold us accountable for our actions. And I think, and I'm not just going to like sort of peddle the transparency line, right? Which, I think, we all sort of default to transparency as a thing. But for us, like, we take it really seriously, and we are constantly tweaking and enhancing our transparency reporting, right? To give more, right? To give more meat, I guess, for people to understand what we're doing. Because again, our preference is that folks have an understanding of what we're doing and why we're doing it. So that way we sort of take the mystery out of it. Like, we don't want to be I don't want to be the great and powerful Oz, to use a Wizard of Oz reference, behind a curtain, just pulling levers, right? Like, my daughter just performed in the play, so it's fresh in my mind. So I think, I do think, well thought out transparency, not just in terms of the actions you take, but the processes you follow, is key to being held accountable. But I should also add, we do participate in organizations which I mentioned at the top, like the Global Network Initiative and others, and they hold us accountable. Like, we do get called to the carpet sometimes when something happens, and we made certain commitments to them as a part of our membership. And when they see something that happened, they'll send us an email or they'll give us a call and say, hey, this happened. We really appreciate an explanation. And so we give them explanations, right? We talk through the issue.
Thanks a lot, Josh, for this. One of the audience, a question from Amal. Amal is asking about taking us back to the safety, the safety and security, especially that there are many platforms out there like Zoom. So maybe she's asking for a shortcut answer. To what extent Zoom is better in terms of privacy, trust, and safety than other platforms? I wish I have next to me the competitors to challenge some of your arguments. I'm afraid I cannot, but this is an invitation to tell us where does Zoom stand in terms of privacy, trust, safety, in comparisons with the many other platforms that we have in place.
Yeah, that's a great question. Now, I will tell you that, like, we do try really hard not to do that thing where we finger wag at other platforms, right? Instead, I'll sort of focus on us, because I think the most important thing is what I mentioned before, is our feedback loop with our customers. The fact that we engage with our customers and users very directly in terms of understanding what safety challenges they face, and then constantly innovating and iterating. So rather than trying to copy what a competitor platform does, we get down, with our customers and say, what problem are you experiencing? What safety problem are you experiencing? And how can we meet your needs? And so it's hard to give you a short answer to this question, because there's so much that we do. In fact, there was recently a great Washington Post article about, some of the things that we've done to sort of minimize or mitigate the risk that your meetings get disrupted. But I think when it comes to Zoom, one of the things that makes it so great is it's easy and it works, right? And that has always been something that people love about it, right? In the platform, and like back in the pandemic days, it was easy. You could send your great grandmother, if she had a computer, a link, and all she had to do is click on it, and boom, you're on, and you can talk to her. So, but with that, right, came some safety risks. So we had to kind of continually meet and understand those safety risks and think about how to address them. So what we did was we built a series of features in the product, right, which I think other platforms have now also done, and again, like we had the ultimate cauldron of experimentation, right? So many people were using it. We were getting so much feedback. But let's start real quickly with safety. So what did we do? So one, we created the waiting room, right? This is the notion of like having a space where somebody could screen people on the way in. Is there anything suspicious about the people that are trying to join your meeting? Two, we created in the meeting and in the waiting room a reporting feature, right? So that way, if something bad is happening in the meeting itself, you can easily report it. And we made that reporting feature as frictionless as we could, while also, making sure that we had the right information we needed to quickly respond. Three, we developed what was called the suspend meeting participant button. This button is like a pause button, right? So let's say something unanticipated or unexpected is happening in your meeting. And right now I'm just talking about meetings, and there's all kinds of other parts of Zoom too, but this is the easier, faster one. The suspend meeting participants button is key because what we found is that people would be having a meeting and they wanted to make it as public as possible. But let's say some people came in because they got the Zoom link on Twitter or whatever the case may be. We wanted to let the host of the meeting take the power back, right, from the disruptors, because it can be very stressful. And so we wanted their ability to just hit pause, right? Which basically said everybody goes black, all their names go up, screens go off, everything goes back. And when the host takes a breath, or the co-host or the moderator takes a breath, they can slowly bring everything back when they feel that it's comfortable. And then a whole host of other features that we continually iterated and innovated on. So what I would say about Zoom, and when it comes to safety and security and privacy, is we never rest. We will never rest. If you see an issue as a user where you feel like your safety, your security, or your privacy are at risk, we will never rest. We will continue to innovate, and we do it really fast. So that's what I can say that I'm very proud of with Zoom.
And with that, actually, Josh, you answered another question from another colleague asking about what do you do when there are these hacking attempts, or when hacking attempts took place where people joined the meeting to disrupt. So I think you already gave us some of these measures that you have in place to address that. But also here, I would like to shift gears a little bit and going back to the human rights domain in particular. And as you've been doing this job for the past 3 years, especially with the expansion of work and the COVID time, are there some lessons or rules of thumbs that you would like to share with us that you've learned over the past 3 years? Because the past 3 years were experimental to many of us, especially when it comes to a company like Zoom. So any lessons learned, rules of thumbs that you would like to share with us?
Oh man, there are so many lessons that we've had to learn.
Well, a few of them. Sorry, that was a rather generic question, but maybe top 3 if you can think of, or the 3 that really bugs you in a way, to say that we learned this the hard way, and things like that.
Well, I think number 1 is that humans are complicated. Like we're just very complicated. We're just a very complicated species, and we all sort of approach the world in different ways, and we all have motivations that sometimes can be perplexing when you're in the safety field. Why people do what they do, how they do it, what they're capable of doing. Any trust and safety practitioner in the field will tell you that your shock meter sort of gets tuned differently each passing day or year that you're in the field. So I think humans are complex, and figuring and sort of thinking through how to tackle that complexity is more challenging than I think most people realize. And I think any trust and safety practitioner, regardless of where they're at in the stack, would have to admit that. 2 is I cannot emphasize enough the importance of humility. I think that you can't. And look, I'm a lawyer. I think I'm pretty smart. Probably should think I'm less smart. And I think I can solve a lot of problems. But what I think I've quickly learned is that I will do so much better for my team and the people that use Zoom if I approach every problem with humility and I encourage others to come forward with their thoughts and perspectives. So I think humility is the sort of second thing. And then related to that is like always maintain a learning mindset. Always maintain a learning mindset. And all three of those are very actually interrelated when you think about it, right? Because if I stop learning, then I'm not going to, try to tackle that human complexity. If I don't have humility about it, we're just not going anywhere. So I think those three things are absolute key lessons that I think I've learned. I mean, not that I was a total, jerk before Zoom, but some really late nights, for at least the first 2 years has really instilled those things. And then again, like I think the processes, the infrastructure that we've built, is a reflection of that. And then I guess, you only asked for three, but the fourth is like, you can't stop, right? Like, it's an ongoing thing. Like you sort of can't relax because the minute you do, something bad will probably happen.
Josh, these are great lessons that, you learn them through the job, but I would say they apply to many, many other domains. I mean, we all, realizing that humans are complex is key and important because that also force us to come up with systems and processes that address that and not just assume the simplicity or naivety, let's say, because we are complex in so many ways, and that's a compliment to us as humans. But also humility is another key important figure and principle, I would say, and learning by doing and keep expanding, or maybe not expanding, but keep experimenting and keep evolving and not to stop. These are really great lessons. So sticking to that part, which is not to stop and keep looking and keep challenging ourselves and keep addressing the challenges. Here, maybe this is a bit tricky question, but where shall we keep our eyes on when it comes to Zoom? What is next? And I'm not here pushing you to tell your competitors what you're doing next. But people's mind is sorry, go ahead. But in people's mind is this whole new domain or the use of artificial intelligence, for example. That's one area. And that comes with potential risks, with potential biases, with some opportunities, obviously. So I'm asking a question and giving a hint to the answer to look at the artificial intelligence domain, but generally, where shall we keep our eyes on? And if you can give us a hint or a bit more than a hint related to artificial intelligence, that would be great, really great.
Well, so you've like teed me up perfectly, and we just did our quarterly earnings, so I feel very comfortable talking about this. But yeah, AI is sort of, it's on the tip of everybody's tongues and the top of everybody's brains. And so, as I sort of mentioned at the top, in terms of what Zoom is, right? Like we're trying to empower limitless human connection, right? And the idea is like, how are all the different ways do people communicate? And it's not just like in a video meeting. It's not just in a chat. It's in systems, right? Whether they're, what's called customer management systems, or email or calendar or whatever the case may be. And so what we think about now is, as Zoom starts moving into artificial intelligence, is how do we gain even some more efficiencies in each one of those contexts? Like, how can we leverage AI responsibly to create like less friction in each one of those ways that we connect? So that's where Zoom is moving. And we're moving there in a relatively, I think, unique way, which is we're using what's called a federated approach, which is sort of like bring your own AI, for lack of a better term, right? Although obviously like Zoom will sort of screen and vet the partners. But for example, we just announced a partnership with Anthropic. We've been exploring a relationship with OpenAI. And the two things about those platforms in particular is that if you go to their own sort of web pages and look at their own safety policies, it becomes relatively clear that they're being thoughtful around the use of the technology, which adheres to our principles about how we need to be thoughtful about our use of technology. But our first integrations we always think about safety by design. So when we think about integrating AI into Zoom, we think about how we integrate it in the safest possible way, right? Like, because some of the threats around AI usage that are sort of covered a lot, which are real, are things like post-truth, right? That's scary. And we all should be super thoughtful about that. Which is a sort of image or text manipulation, such that people don't know what is real and what is not, or what is real and what is not real. Yes. But I think like Zoom's first integrations, I think as we continue to explore this, are going to be things like, let's say you're having a series of chats throughout the day with your team. Well, how can we leverage AI to like summarize all those chats into a very succinct sort of summary, such that you can quickly scan it, analyze it, and respond, right? Or how can you take all that chat information and automatically populate your calendar with meetings, or tee up notes that you can send back in response for you to review before you send. And things like that to sort of drive efficiency. The quote bots that a customer might interact with, when dealing with one of our customer systems. So how do we make the best ones that are super responsive? I don't know about you all, but like just the other day, I called, to try to get something covered with a bill, and it was like I just kept going around and around with their bot, and it was probably the most frustrating thing. And I'm screaming to the phone like, speak to a representative, So like leveraging this tech, and it seems like super simple and maybe a little boring, but developing this technology such that like you don't have that experience, our customers don't have that experience, our users don't have that experience, and that it like minimizes friction so you can get things more accomplished is sort of how Zoom is thinking about AI. But really, as I said, the sky's the limit, with the caveat that we want to be very careful, responsible, pick our partners carefully, and think through the integrations of AI into our product as part of a safety by design approach.
Very helpful. Thank you so much, Josh, for these. Time is flying, so we have around 9 minutes left. So this is a quick reminder for the audience with us. If you have any questions, it is the time to ask it now. There's actually one quick question here. Does Zoom use end-to-end encryption for meetings, especially for the services that are provided in the Palestinian Authority areas?
Yeah, so we do have end-to-end encryption is available. You have to opt in to using it, right? Like our platform by default is what's called advanced encrypted, but you can enable end-to-end encryption. And we've got a lot of material on that on the website to make it really clear. And we have to be super careful, and we are, about making sure that you all understand what the distinction between advanced encryption and end-to-end encryption is, right? We have an obligation to our users to be crystal clear about that. But we do offer what all security researchers, I think, would define as end-to-end encryption.
So there is one. I do have at least 2 more questions, so I'm just checking if there is there any questions. Meanwhile, there is one question coming in here saying, are you worried about privacy lawsuits and being fined like happened with other platforms, for example? Is that something, you're a lawyer, is that something coming your way? Are you worried about that?
So look, I would say that you would not be a responsible platform if you were not constantly worried that that you might be scrutinized by regulators. And I think so. Like, I don't have a specific concern that Zoom's going to be targeted. We are under what's called an FTC consent decree, which is, again, it's publicly available information. So we are under supervision in that sense. So we are being quite careful and subject to auditing around those sorts of things. But also we are across Zoom very, very comfortable engaging with regulators, right, to answer certain questions about our data flows and data practices. So, but I think, yeah, I mean, you never know. But I think we try very hard, or I think we succeed actually in ensuring that we are compliant with all, with all relevant regulations when it comes to privacy.
And I mean, we're running out of time, but I really would like to go back to what you described earlier, that could be seen as multi-stakeholder approach. I mean, the processes that you talked about of accountability, of transparency, of consulting with other stakeholders who are concerned, it's quite interesting. And the way you described it was quite clear. But how does it look like, maybe, or where are the areas maybe to look forward? Where are the areas that you're trying to invest in order to make it even more efficient? I'm assuming there is always space for improvement. I'm assuming it is there, but there are areas where we can. So if you can walk us briefly through this multi-stakeholder approach that you're adopting at Zoom, and how it can deliver even more.
Yeah, so I think the best part about the there's so many advantages to having a multi-stakeholder approach, but the biggest dividend I think we get from Zoom is not just sort of like thinking through like, what should we do here, what should we do here, but actually sort of exposure to new and innovative ideas and thoughts, right? Because what we found in engaging with other organizations, the Global Internet Forum to Counter Terrorism, Tech Against Terrorism, the Tech Coalition, which is dedicated towards combating, child safety issues, right? And We Protect, and a bunch of others that we participate in, is that, sometimes there's a wealth of knowledge in there, and there are sometimes even smaller organizations or companies, not that we're that huge, but that kind of also come with an interesting level of thinking, that they're considering to tackle a particular problem. And because safety is such an interesting challenge, it's, again, not easy because of that human complexity, but also because you've got this sort of multilateral approach around the world to safety regulation, which can sometimes be conflicting and not work exactly well with one another. Everybody is sort of like facing these things, and the participants in these organizations are really dedicated towards their mission, right? Like, so, when we participate, Tech Coalition is a great example. When we participate in the Tech Coalition for Child Safety Initiatives, like, everybody in there firmly believes that we need to protect children in the online spaces. And so the question is like, how do we do that in a way that is both privacy preserving, but also recognizes the real threat against our youth? And so that's like an amazing mission, and thinking through how to solve it, and then gathering like both tech policy approaches from all those different stakeholders pays so much dividends to us. So just sort of, we go in. We also have a policy at Zoom that we don't over participate, right? Meaning that, like, we try to only participate in the organizations that we know we can give some resources to, right? Not just financial resources, but like time and attention. Because it's not my favorite thing if, we say, hey, we're part of organization X, but nobody ever participates, or the people that participate can't actually, communicate something so we can grow and learn. So we are sort of selective in the sense that we make sure that we participate where we can, and we can actually give and receive from the organization we participate in. I don't know if that answered the question, but
it does. And we have 3 minutes left, but I want to take the risk and ask one additional question before the last one. And the last one will only take you 30 seconds to answer. But I'm taking the risk because I'm talking to a lawyer now. And I want to ask a bit of a question with a legal twist, because there are different legal frameworks that you work with. There's the global ones, but different frameworks, different legal structures per country, per region. I could think of some EU regulations that could appear, I'm not a lawyer, could appear as contradictory to each other. So how do you reconcile that? How do you deal with this potential contradictions between different laws, different regulations, or basically simply how do you deal with different legal frameworks that you function within?
Yeah, so I mean, there's sort of a range of how to deal with that, from like easier to like very, very hard, right? And it gets harder and harder when it's a government maybe that doesn't adhere to democratic principles, let's say, where our principles and law, our principles of U.S. law are going to probably come first. 90% of the time we're going to adhere to where we come there and take some risk, right? And by risk, I mean like take some risk that, maybe our platform is blocked or something like that. And, X, Y, or Z, or we receive some sort of like punishment, right? Because we adhere to our principles, right? To a little bit easier, which is that some, countries are trying to legislate in a way that is good intended, right? So whether it's the EU or some of the US regulations, it's the intent behind it's good. So the way we approach that is through engagement. And one of the reasons why we've been so forward about how we're trying to be transparent about what we are, what we aren't, how we operate, what we can do, what we can't do, and all that kind of stuff is because we want to go forward, engage with regulators and say, hey, when you're thinking about these regulations, can we just sort of give you some ideas about how we operate, how we don't operate, and all that kind of stuff, so we can figure out whether this applies or this applies or that applies or that applies. I'm not going to say that's going to be 100% successful all the time, but we've had some positive engagement in that sense, right? And what we find sometimes is that some of the regulators or the staffers actually just appreciate that we're willing to have that conversation with them. So it's not a fail-safe. We are required we're a U.S. company, so we are required to follow U.S. law in the base case. And so, as we engage in countries and we think about market entry, back to your point earlier about some of our human rights considerations, one of the things we have to consider when we enter a market is what that's going to look like and whether those laws are going to conflict with our principles.
Great. Josh, in 25 seconds, as Ibrahim is telling me, let's finish this, and we will. What would you like, one key message that you would like our audience to leave this conversation with?
I'd love for the audience to feel safe using our product. I'd love for them to see the potential of Zoom, to amplify their lives, and to provide, again, our, this capability to communicate in a limitless fashion, and do so feeling safe, and that they've got some very thoughtful trust and safety team members and product folks and engineers that are working tirelessly to make that happen for them.
Well, with that, limitless is the word. And with that, I really would like to thank you so much, Josh, for being with us today, for having this conversation together. I truly enjoyed this conversation. I learned a lot from it. I hope our audience also appreciated that conversation and learned from it. And it is definitely to be continued. And thank you so much for being with us today, Josh. Thank you, dear audience, for being with us today. Good luck with the next sessions. Enjoy them and have a wonderful day. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.